What's up, guys? This is Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tesla, and the overall markets and talk about what's happening with the charts so far looking at these current setups as to give you guys my price predictions for tomorrow. Just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I'm saying as financial advice whatsoever. Anyways, as far as the market's going, we got this rejection that happened on Wednesday with FOMC because Jerome Powell made it very clear the Fed is not guaranteeing a rate cut in December. And the market fully basically priced that in, only to see a bit of a rug pull. And then after that, much of the news that came out involving President Trump and President Xi Jinping of China forming their agreements was priced in, and the market ended up selling off as a result, making a lower high. So for now, it looks like the market is seeing some consolidation, but there is a risk of us dipping a bit lower to fill this gap, and maybe even the second gap down here on SPY. But even if that happens, I do see that as another good potential buying opportunity for the end of November. I'm going to break down exactly why that is. Right, it's not just SPY. The overall market did this. We got a double top leg structure on the QQQ, the exact setup we were talking about on Friday. And I think that we're barely holding our 20 EMA, the green line right here. So if that does not hold, there's going to be a risk of us continuing to fall lower, especially as we have this gap down here at 617 to fill. So what do I think is going to happen to the markets moving forward? We're going to break down these charts and go over some news about the Fed. I first want to talk about what Jerome Powell was reminding us about. So before, the market was very confident we were going to get a cut in December, and there's a very good chance we will still get the cuts, but it's gone down to about 69.8%. Now, why is that? Of course, Jerome Powell has to be very cautious. He can't just announce the cut this early on, right? We still have about 1.5 months until the next FOMC, maybe a little bit less time than that. And then the Fed has to look at data. They have to look at what's happening with the unemployment numbers, inflation, and such. So we have to be very patient with this, and the market chose this to basically sell off from. But keep in mind that this sell off is going to be another opportunity because Wall Street will be once again getting ready to load up on shares as we continue to fall a bit lower. And I do see this as another opportunity. And why is that? Because as time goes on, when you look at the Fed's overall repurchase agreements, they're beginning to buy up treasuries even more. We're seeing lots of treasury securities being purchased by the Fed. There's a big increase right here. If you guys can see the blue line right here, the Fed is beginning to stimulate the economy again with this. Why is that? Because the Fed knows that unemployment is once again spiking, and there's a good chance it's going to continue to increase as time goes on, and the Fed has to be very cautious. So they're not directly printing money, but they're indirectly going to stimulate the economy by buying up these treasury bonds and mortgage-backed securities. That's what the Fed is going to be doing, and when you transition away from quantitative tightening, that is temporarily going to be more bullish for the markets for the next upcoming months, right? It's still bullish for end of November to December, in my personal opinion. So I still think the market's set for a big end of the year rally, but we could be looking for a bit of a pullback first if we see certain things pan out. Jerome Powell is going to be one of the reasons, but for the shorter term, right, I think the market's going to be a bit more reactive to data, and that could be our catalyst to get the market to slow down a bit before another big run is about to start, right? And I'm not saying that this guarantees that, there's not going to be a recession or anything like that. We're simply just going based off the data we currently have. The Fed is telling us that that's what they're essentially doing, and as of right now, you could argue we're in a recession or whatever you want to say. It's possible we are in one, but we just don't know yet. But we don't really have the data that proves that, right? We don't really have that data yet that proves we're truly in a recession. Whether you trust the data or not, I completely understand. But my point is, we just have to go based off the data we currently have. And the data we have suggests that this dip could be a buying opportunity for another rally to come towards the end of the year. That's more of like a short-term projection, at least for this market. Now, why do I say that? It's just based off what we're seeing from the Fed and the current charts and the fact that the market was just at all-time highs a couple of days ago. It's not really in a big crash. It's just a temporary downtrend right over here. So what's going to affect us for the shorter term? Well, the answer is this. Tomorrow is going to be Monday, November 3rd, 2025. Okay, at 9:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, that's 15 minutes after the stock market opens, we have the S&P Global Manufacturing PMI data. And then at 10 o'clock a.m., we have the ISM Manufacturing PMI, Employment New Orders and Prices also coming out. That's 30 minutes after the stock market opens. Then we have the 3 and 6 month bill auctions coming out later on. And for now, all of this is once again going to cause some volatility. So I do think there could be some volatility with the manufacturing numbers. And then another big piece of data coming out is not going to be on Tuesday because lots of data is delayed due to the government shutdown, unfortunately. but we do have some data coming out. We still have the ADP employment change on Wednesday. That may cause some volatility. And I would like to see us basically dip with this data coming out. I would like to see that. We'll see, just to be safe, because it could create another buying opportunity for the markets. A couple more things, just real quick. We have Berkshire Hathaway going to give us more information tomorrow. Palantir and a couple more like HIMS announcing their earnings for Monday. Tuesday, we have lots of chip stocks. We start off with Uber and Shopify in the morning alongside Pfizer. And then finally, we have aftermarket close, AMD and Supermicro also announcing their earnings. For Wednesday, we have McDonald's and a few more, and everything else is going to be more quiet to finish off the week. But expect some volatility on Tuesday, especially for semiconductors. Now, when it comes to President Trump, keep in mind that President Trump has been talking about how there's been some good news with the overall agreements that came out between him and President Xi Jinping. They have once again agreed to lower tariffs and then decrease the export restrictions on minerals. But as of right now, this is an agreement, and the trade deal is, I think, yet to be signed. The White House is giving us more details about that. And that is some good news that came out. The details are now being confirmed by the White House, but we need to see if this is going to be signed in the future. President Trump said that very soon they could sign the deal. But overall, there was a lot of progress that was made, and that is something that's worth noting, because from the stock market standpoint, right, much higher tariffs on China would have a big effect on the markets, especially on computer chips, semiconductors, and many other machinery parts, and the list goes on. So for now, this has been a more positive news. Much of that was priced in, which is why the market is kind of like dropping. And then President Trump also said that there's been other geopolitical things that were discussed, such as the current status of Taiwan, how China is not agreed, or they're basically saying that they do not want to take action against it. That's what he claims. So that is another positive piece of news. But I just think that a lot of that news was priced in, and despite that, the market has been downtrending ever since we had these events pan out. We rallied approaching the events, and once the events came out, FOMC and then President Trump's meeting with Xi Jinping of China, then the market starts to downtrend, which is kind of like the saying that goes, buy the rumors, sell the news. That's what's happening, at least thus far. So what's my prediction for the stock market? Let's go over some levels, and I'll break down my prediction after that. If you want to be a bull, you want to see us basically invalidate this downtrend by basically breaking and closing above 686. If SPY manages to pull that off, we could be looking for an attempt to hit new all-time highs. If we're bearish, you want to see us continue to fill at 682, and then eventually 677 will be retested, and then that could take us all the way down towards this support. If 677 does not hold at the 50 EMA, there is a gap all the way down here at 672. Then we'll see if we bounce off that or not, so give this the time it needs. So looking at SPY, we have an inverse cup and handle so far, and we're showing some weakness. However, we're not officially breaking down. I just think there's going to be some consolidation, because notice for the last 2 days, SPY touches near the low 680s, then it bounces. But as you approach 685 to 686, we like to reject. So we're kind of doing like a back and forth thing right now. I would like to see us kind of pop a bit, drop again, and kind of consolidate like this between 680 and 685 while making somewhat lower highs. And then I'd like to see us basically form a bearish wedge possibly and come back down to fill this gap at 677. We're going to see if that holds. If it doesn't, I think 672 could be coming. So I think that we consolidate basically tomorrow, and then there's going to be a risk of us testing 677 to 672. And I think that as long as we don't get any major negative news after that, we could be looking for a nice bounce once 677 to 672 is tested. I think this is what the market will do. We're going to see some consolidation like this, just like what we saw on Friday. And then we continue to fall a little bit for the next couple of days to create this buying opportunity. I think there's a good chance this is what's going to happen before we see another bounce. All right. So I predict consolidation, then a dip towards 677 to 672 on SPY, depending on if 677 holds. And then we should be looking for a bounce off one of those levels. I think that's the most likely possibility. All right. But watch your levels just to be safe and just for confirmation. On the QQQ, the same setup exists. There's also this very beautiful gap down here at 617. In fact, 617 isn't the only gap. There's another gap, I think, at 610. So those could be some buying opportunities if we do get a nice dip. We're going to see which one acts as our main support, but I do think that there is potential to fill this gap on the QQQ. We're currently at 629, so there could be a more significant drop in tech coming. but we're going to see how much we end up dipping. So if we're bullish, just hypothetically, you want to see us break and hold above 635. If we break that, we're looking for a bigger push. If we end up losing support right here at 625, though, I would not rule out at least 617. As of right now, we do like to bounce near 625, and we also like to reject near 630. So I think we basically pop tomorrow morning, come back down, consolidate just like this. And I would not be surprised if we continue to make lower highs. See how we have a lower high, and lower high. As long as we're not back above like 635, we're going to be favoring this gap fill. I think we might be going for the gap fill back down towards 617. That would be a nice dip. And we might just bounce from there. That could be where we end up bottoming. But if we're lucky, in case it loses that, if we lose this gap support over here and we end up losing 617, we could go as low as like 610 to fill this gap. That would also be a test of the previous all-time highs. So I think 617 to 610 could be tested on the QQQ, somewhere in that range. And that could be a very, very good buying opportunity in the next like week or two. And then we're looking for a big bounce after that. And why do I say that? Well, it's because of the Fed's policies, and then simultaneously with all this buying back and all this liquidity that exists in the markets, we dump and get bought back up. We dump, consolidate, and get bought back up. We dump and get bought back up. So in case we do dump again, it's going to be another potential buying opportunity, at least for the short term, right? We're just talking about the end of the year here. I'm not talking about 2-3 years out. I'm just talking about what I see for the shorter term. Now, on the IWM, we had a high here, came down. It's been kind of like in this consolidation, but notice that we're making lower highs again. So we had a high here, came down, with a lower high, came down. We're just making lower highs. We're also below our key EMAs. In case you want to be bullish, you want to see us reclaim like 248 to 250. If 250 is reclaimed, we could bounce bigger, but as of right now, we're making lower highs, and I would like to see us bounce tomorrow morning and reject, consolidate, and eventually start dipping towards 242. If 242 fails us, I would not rule out this gap down here. See this big gap down here at 237? We could be dumping towards that before we try to bounce again. So there could be like a really nice bounce once we get back down there. So we'll just have to see what happens and be very, very patient, at least nonetheless. For ES, we're making lower highs, and lower highs, but we're in a consolidation. So what happens to ES is, as we've been touching around 6,900, that's very close to where the 20 EMA is. That's resistance. And as we touch 6860, we're kind of like bouncing. So I do think I think that we basically consolidate like this, but then we could dip a little bit more on ES in case we get a rejection like this to come back down towards this resistance, becoming support around 6,800, if not 6,780. I would like to see us come down a little bit lower to test those levels, maybe with the jobs numbers coming out. And then we could be looking for another buying opportunity and a big rally to complete November. So keep that in mind. That's what I'm anticipating. On NQ, there's an opportunity here. There's this big gap down here at 25,547. So if we reclaim 26,000, we're looking for a big bounce. If not, we're looking for 25,826. If that fails us, we could be dipping back down to 25,500 to fill this gap. Maybe go a little bit lower. We could even try to retest the previous all-time highs at 25,367. But somewhere around the 25,500 range, that could be a really nice buying opportunity. And we're going to see if we get some kind of bounce off that or not. So watch that very closely. On Bitcoin, we have a nice looking consolidation. If we break 111,000, we're looking for a bounce. But if we lose 108,000, we're looking for a dip. I think Bitcoin dips a bit more to retest around 108,000. We'll see if it bounces. Tesla, however, might outperform the market a bit because we have the shareholder meeting. Tesla's a bit of an exception. We also have a nice accumulation in terms of our setup. We're also making higher lows on Tesla. We're holding this white trend line acting as a support. So in case Tesla does kind of like dip a bit with the markets, this could just be another buying opportunity. And Tesla might outperform the market this week with the shareholder meeting because there's a very good chance that shareholders will approve Elon Musk's pay package, in my opinion. And Tesla might do a better job at holding up. Now, in case Tesla does dip, in case this just ends up failing, and in case it does end up coming down and loses support around 446, there is this gap down here at 433. So even if it does come back down and this is like a head and shoulders, there is like a bearish case, that would be nothing more than a buying opportunity. But I think it's less likely Tesla dumps really hard unless we get some bad news. It might come down to retest 445 to 450 before it bounces again, but it depends on the shareholder meeting. Nvda, I am a little bit concerned about Nvda because what could fuel the market dipping is this right here, the gaps, right? There's this gap over here around 200. There's another gap down here at 191, 186, 182. If Nvidia sees a 5 to 10% dip, right, and we end up dipping to fill a lot of these gaps, that could create a temporary buying opportunity for the end of the year for this thing to bounce like crazy. We're going to see just to be safe, but there are lots of gaps down here. I do think it's due to come down closer to those levels. So that could be another opportunity, and that may also drag down tech. Appl had a nice earnings overall, but we pumped and dumped. We didn't really see a massive rally, and there are two gaps below. There's a gap down here at 262, another gap down here at 252. So these could be buying opportunities in that range. This resistance becoming support happens to be around 260. So if we dip to the lower 260s, I could be looking for another opportunity. For Netflix, there's a gap on the daily, but overall, it was due for a bounce after so much downside. So I would not be surprised if this just consolidates for some time and then it tries to bounce back up to 1150. MSTR is also trying to bounce. It might try to retest 276, and we'll see if that breaks. If so, it could break out higher. Celsius is consolidating. It's showing some weakness here, so it might retest 60. We're going to see if it holds. If not, 58.62 might be tested. So I'm seeing some weakness on Celsius. Supermicro has a gap down here. So, even though it's trying to bounce, we're going to see if 52 holds. Might pop above this and then reject. And if 52 does not hold, we could be dipping to 50 flat. If that doesn't hold, we could be looking for this gap pull back down to 48, and we'll see how it goes. Palantir is also on an uptrend right now. If we lose 194, we're looking for a big dump, but as long as we're above this, we could continue to push. It does look a bit more bullish, technically speaking, but of course, it depends on earnings. Earnings come out on, I think tomorrow we have earnings, so we're going to see if we get a rejection or not, but for now, we do look bullish approaching them. Rivian is looking a little bit more bullish, might retest around 13.7, and then we'll see if it rejects. SoFi is holding above 29.76. If that breaks, we're looking for the low 30s, and we'll see if we reject. AMD is making lower highs, so it's not looking that good. We have a head and shoulders like pattern, which could favor downside, but I don't know for sure, guys. It depends on earnings. I don't really like to play earnings as much. Only with money I'm willing to lose. Excuse me. For ARM, we have resistance at 170. We're going to see if we could break this just temporarily before rejecting again. Keep in mind it's technically on a slight downtrend. It might kind of pop and drop. PayPal also has a double bottom, might be looking for an attempt for the 70.14 to 71, and we'll see how it goes. Coinbase got a pump and dump. We're going to see if you hold 339. If not, we could be dipping lower back down to 330. So we'll just have to see what happens after that. Might kind of like pop here before it drops a little bit. Amazon is showing a little bit of weakness. We got a massive pump after earnings, but the question is, will Amazon return to start filling this gap, or does it return to fill some of the gap, right? That's also very possible. It might retest 238. We have a nice resistance becoming support there before it tries to bounce again. Meta has a massive gap above, and it's obviously bullish overall because, earnings would have been a massive beat if it wasn't for the tax that they faced. But overall, despite that, we're still in a bit of a downtrend. We're going to see if we could base at 650. If not, we could be dipping more. But there could be a nice buying opportunity coming to Meta. Google's on a bit of a downtrend. We have 277 as our support and 266 as our other support. We also have resistance right here at 286, so it could be dipping to 277, if not as low as 271. Then Microsoft is making lower highs here. We're in a range between 524 and 515. If that doesn't hold, we could be dipping as well back down to 508, so be very careful. Oracle's trying to bounce back up to 267, so we'll see what happens. And finally, the VIX is kind of pumping and rejecting a little bit, so it might consolidate a little bit before it eventually tries to bounce, which makes me suspect that the stock market may consolidate before we see more potential downside to finish filling these gaps in SPY and the QQQ for a temporary dip. But for the end of the year, this is going to be likely a nice buying opportunity just for the end of the year rally. I'm just referring to that. So that's what I'm seeing, at least for now. With that being said, I thank you all so much for listening. Hope you guys found value in this video. We're going to likely see some consolidation tomorrow before we eventually start to dip. That's the most likely possibility. But always watch your levels and set stops and manage risks just to be safe. I wish you all nothing but the best. I thank you all so much for listening, and peace out.